Hello and welcome to Green Finance Focus, where we bring you in-depth conversations with some of the world's leading experts in the decarbonization of the economy and the role finance plays in that transformation. My name is Dylan Degatti, and I am currently an undergraduate student at Yale University and a member of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. I'm here with a very special guest, Mr. Vincent Stanley. Mr. Stanley is a co-author with Yvonne Chouinard of The Responsible Company and has been with Patagonia on and off since its beginning in 1973, holding key executive roles such as head of sales or marketing for many of those years. He's also Patagonia's longtime chief storyteller. Mr. Stanley helped develop the Footprint Chronicles, the company's interactive website that outlines the social and environmental impact of its products, the Common Threads partnership, and Patagonia Books. He currently serves as the company's director of philosophy and is a resident fellow at CBAY. So with that being said, hello, Mr. Stanley, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Dylan. Okay.
Today, I'd like to discuss your experiences with Patagonia and thoughts on corporate responsibility. So to start, you don't hear of many companies that have directors of philosophy. So could you tell us a little bit more about your work as the director of philosophy at Patagonia and how this role came to be?
Yeah, it goes back to the late 80s, early 90s, and Patagonia had started to grow as a company and had growing without direction. So we were doubling sales every year. We were adding lines. At one point, Patagonia had an equestrian line, 3 different sailing lines for different classes of boats. And at a certain point, I think Yvonne started to question, am I creating a company that I actually want to come to work for every day, or am I creating something that has nothing to do with my values, the products I care about and the need to be sold? So he started to gather employees, about 30 at a time, and we would go off to places like Yosemite or Marin Headlands and sit around in circles, 15, 20 people, and hash out, how is it we want to do business? What practices do we believe in? And we called those Patagonia philosophies. We wrote them and created them by business functions. So HR went together, marketing, sales, design, production, etc. And Yvonne used to teach classes. He would do it seminar style, about 12 people at a time. And we'd sit around and talk about, really focus on what does quality mean at Patagonia? Because a lot of people might think quality is subjective, but if you're all working for one company and trying to produce things, you'd better agree on what the definition of quality is. And also environmentalism. Why was that so important to the company? So this is a long answer, but I think it's kind of key to how we developed it. Yvonne published a book that I helped with called Let My People Go Surfing. And the middle part of that book, it is those 8 functional philosophies. So when I, as you mentioned, I've been with the company on and off, mostly on for now half a century. And so when I wanted to leave my operational responsibilities, what I wanted to do was to teach these classes. They hadn't been taught for years. And what I found was, in the course of writing the book, and also in the course of just the last 15 or 20 years of the company, so we have so much written down about our values, about what we believe, how we want to operate, how we want to influence other businesses. But that's not enough. You also have to talk about how this actually plays out in the daily workplace. So teaching the classes with 12 people at a time gives us a chance to talk about, okay, we believe X and X. How does that work in your job? Does that make your work that you're hired to do more difficult? Does it inspire you? Does it make you want to stay in bed and pull the covers over your head? That's the origin. And so what I do is I work with employees. I also work with management when we have sometimes difficult questions. COVID was a good example. And then I also spend about a third of the time working mostly with graduate students, a lot at CBAE, through CBAE with the School of Environment, School of Management, and then also as a kind of evangelist for the B Corp community.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting. So what initially made you want to work for Patagonia, to backtrack a little bit?
Nepotism. I and I was broke. I was 20 years old working in a car wash during a recession, and my uncle Yvon Chenard, and his blacksmith shop. He was making climbing gear then. Patagonia hadn't started. His shop was about 20 miles from where I lived. So I asked him for a job, and intending to stay for 6 months and then save the money and go travel. And here I am still.
The rest is history, as they
Yeah,
say.
yeah, exactly.
That's great. So in previous interviews, you've talked about, ideas of corporate sustainability, but you've said that, responsibility is a more valuable term than sustainability in the context of companies. Can you just elaborate on this?
Yeah. I think one of the problems with the word sustainability is really what everybody uses. And I think our resistance to it is because it can give you the illusion that you can actually reach sustainability fairly easily. And what we've found with industrial processes, that everything we do at Patagonia, and for most processes that make things, we're still taking more from the planet than we give back. I was just reading a scary article in the New York Times today about electric cars. So I drive electric cars, but the cobalt and the lithium come from China. Actually, the cobalt, I think, comes from the Congo, controlled by China. The mining generates enormous amounts of waste, air pollution, etc. So I think that we need to adopt the mindset that all of these processes are harmful. We want to reduce the harm, but we also want to be very conscious of everything we're making as manufacturers, and particularly for consumer goods that don't last a long time. Or if they do, our clothes last, many of them 10 to 15 years. But we should be judicious about our purchases because there is an environmental cost. Now, there's another word, since we published the Responsible Company 10 years ago, another word has come to the fore called, people use regenerative. And in some ways, we like this word. We started a food company a few years ago called Patagonia Provisions. And what we found that by adopting regenerative organic practices, which means when you're growing things, when you're growing food in soil, not just stop using chemicals, but also use practices like crop rotation and companion planting, no tillage or reduced tillage, that actually build up soil faster than nature can. You're actually giving back to the earth more than you're taking. So that's a kind of North Star for us now. And in the food company, everything we introduce, every new product we introduce has to solve some problem in the food system or in agriculture. But so that's kind of the skinny and what we think about that. There's a banker in Florida, it's called was called the first green bank. It's got a new bank now. But he said, sustainable is not a very interesting word. Nobody would want a sustainable marriage, right? So I think it has two faults. One is it sets expectations too high, and then it's not a very inspiring process to go through just to be sustainable.
Yeah, certainly. More responsible and regenerative are definitely more specific, better terms to use. So
yeah, thanks. And the beauty of the word responsible is that everybody can be responsible, which is to kind of face the reality you're facing and say, okay, is there something we're doing that we don't like? Is there a way to change it? That's just a very simple question to ask that's really critical to making improvements.
Yeah, certainly. So to talk more about the theme of responsibility, today many companies have explicit net zero emission promises. How can we make sure that these companies are responsible and that they meet these promises and better, prevent possible greenwashing in the future?
It's kind of a tough area because people have, I mean, it's a great idea to decarbonize the economy, and it's critical work, and there's a lot going on. But you also can't kid yourself. I mean, if buying offsets is only a first step. And so when companies say, okay, we're gonna reach net zero, including Patagonia, when we say we're gonna reach net zero by year X, the more important questions are, how are you going to reduce your the greenhouse gases you generate, reduce your pollution. And also, we shouldn't forget about the other significant environmental problems, which include the loss of biodiversity and the loss of fresh water in rivers and the acidification of the oceans. So again, my caution is it's important for the world to adopt that standard, but it's easy to concentrate on that and to ignore some of the real things that need to be done.
Yeah. So I know it might be a little easier for developed companies to focus on responsibility, but how do you think growing and new companies should view responsibility? Should they prioritize their growth first if they're just starting out and then focus on responsibility when they have more capital? Or is it case, sensitive? Or, if it comes at the cost of growth, should they prioritize responsibility over growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my advice, because I came out of a company that didn't prioritize our environmental activity. I mean, nobody did in the 70s and 80s. And it's hard to make the switch. And I think that also, once you start to look at not necessarily growth, but if you start to look at business health versus doing the right thing as an area of tension and compromise, which it is, but if you start to accept that, you almost always tend to come down on the side of the bottom line in terms of profit or in terms of growth. But I think it's more important, and younger entrepreneurs, I think, are onto this, is to build your business right from the start. If your business model includes doing the right thing, then you're building your business on a premise that is sustainable for the business, that you can continue to do the whole time. If you start from another premise and say, okay, well, I'm going to grow my company to a certain size and then I'm going to become a good guy. Well, you're going to change the expectations of your stakeholders midstream, your investors, your employees, your customers, the communities you operate in. They're all looking at what you do, and they determine what kind of person you are and what kind of business you're running. And 5 years in, you say, well, guess what? You're going to give 1% of sales to environmental causes. Well, your investors are going to say, I didn't sign up for that. And your employees are going to say, well, what about my raise? So I think it's really important to determine what your key values, your core values and your core strengths are when you start the business, then hold fast to that.
How about, sorry, what were you going to say?
Just that's what the B Corp movement is essentially about.
So with, to kind of build on those points, when you have these companies who are already established and they now want to be more responsible, what's the best way to go about it? I'm sure it's different for clothing companies or automobile companies, but to not anger possible stakeholders who don't really care so much about the whole responsibility aspect.
It's a more delicate process, but I think that what any company can do is to take on a few initiatives. And if they're successful, then they prove to the naysayers or to the people who don't care that, hey, this is something that can be done. There are a lot of environmental initiatives that actually save money because your waste is it's expensive to have waste taken away or scrubbed. Energy is expensive, water is expensive. It's actually harder on the social side because usually on the social side, if you're improving your practices, you're paying people more or you're providing better working conditions. But in any case, a few successes, people start to catch on. I think at Patagonia, for instance, almost everybody who came to work at the company was not as much of an environmentalist as they became after working at the company. And part of the reason that became more important to people individually is they could see the successes. They could see that if we confronted a problem, worked together, we could come up with a solution that hadn't existed before and that other people could adopt. And that becomes really important. The profit is not the only motivator in business. There's a lot of motivators in business, and part of it is making a really great product. And part of it is just being able to bring your whole self to work and do the right thing. Nobody wants to walk out the front door and leave half of their values behind.
I would hope so, yeah. So a question I like to ask everyone who I talk to is, what gives you hope for the future of society and its ability to address the challenges of climate change, and more specifically through a lens of finance?
Well, it's hard for me to answer that question simply, but I think the lens of finance is absolutely significant because finance as an activity is behind the 8 ball. I mean, there are a lot of other parts of the companies in production or marketing or communications in which people are ahead of where the finance people are. But the finance people are tremendously influential. And when they get on board, they can make really big changes. I'll give you a quick example. We needed to expand our warehouse. We outgrew it in Reno, and we needed a second location, so we're going to put one in the east. And we have our finance and our ops people driving around with realtors in Ohio and Tennessee and Pennsylvania. And the realtors say, oh, keep showing them raw farmland, right? So we're going to put up a 300,000 square foot warehouse and deduct it from the food system or deduct it from the natural world. And our people are going, this makes no sense for Patagonia. We can't do this. So they ended up working with an NGO to place the warehouse on a reclaimed coal mine. There's 22 flooded levels that used to be used for mining coal below our warehouse floor. So the more finance people can think creatively and kind of join in the environmental effort, the better, I think, for society. In terms of what gives me hope, I think I'm asked this question, and one of the things I like to point out is that Yvon Chouinard, I've worked with for 50 years and known all my life, is about the most pessimistic person I've ever met. And he'll tell you that, he described himself as a doombat. Then I can understand that because he's, in his prime, he spent 250 nights a year out under the stars. So he knows that how the natural world has been, how much of it has been lost since he became an adult. That he fishes in rivers where the fish are fewer and much smaller than they were, et cetera, et cetera. But it's never stopped him from acting. He's never said, I'm just too bummed out. So I'm not gonna, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. I'm not gonna make a change. And I think that that's more important, that sense of agency, and it's a sense of responsibility. There's the Haida leader, we quote, Haida's a tribe in the Western British Columbia, Gerald Amos, and we quote him. He says that the most important right we have is the right to be responsible. And what this means is that sense of agency, that sense that we can act on what we see and what we learn, is actually a lot of what makes us human. So I think that's more important than being hopeful, because we don't know. There are all kinds of conjectures about, oh, if we don't stop drilling for oil, we'll be gone in 10 or 15 years, or some will say 12. None of that matters. What matters is, oh yeah, this is a serious situation, and let's figure out how we can change it.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Yeah, thank you so much. Those answers are very thoughtful, very interesting. I'm sure all viewers will be very happy after watching this interview. So that's all I have. Is there anything else you would like to add? Any final points?
No, but thanks for reaching out, and good luck to you, and good luck to everybody who's not just good luck, but a good life to everybody who's watching this.
Thank you very much. Well, it's been very informative, and hopefully we can speak again in the future. Thank you.
All right. You take care, John. Thanks.